So here's the thing about Kent Hughes and the Montreal Canadiens. If you head over to his draft history as GM of the Canadiens, so from 2022 and beyond, there are a number of guys that I think we can all look at and say, wow, about. Juraj Slafkovsky, of course, first overall guy. Lane Hutson, absolute stud of a second-round pick. Adam Engstrom is a guy who's doing very well. He's showing off good things in his development. You've got Florian Jacki and Jacob Fowler adding on with David Reinbacher in 2023. Bogdan Konyushkov is looking super good as well. Man, oh man, we Habs fans love to hype up our prospects, right? Even last year, Demidov, Hage, and Koivu are all providing such incredible value so far. Not to mention Tyler Thorpe in the WHL, and Owen Protz too. And then this year, everybody's talking about LJ Mooney, everybody's talking about Alexander Zhuravsky. For the most part, Kent Hughes has done wonders drafting for the Habs. But this first-round pick in 2022, the one that wasn't first overall. Today, we are talking about Filip Mesar and asking whether or not he is Kent Hughes' first bust. And I get it, it's very early to go out there and say that about a guy who is literally 21 years old. He was drafted 3 years ago. What are we doing calling a guy who's that young a bust? But here's the thing, when it comes to Canadiens prospects and guys that were taken in certain spots, I honestly do feel like it's fair to say that out of all the players who have progressed, especially in this draft year, Adam Engstrom looks like he could make the team in some capacity next season. He could get a game or two if somebody gets injured. Owen Beck is fighting for his life trying to make that transition, but he's right there in the mix. Hutson is a Calder winner, and Slafkovsky is making $7 million a year. When it comes to these guys, Filip Mesar's in a spot where the draft spot and the modern-day talent don't really align. Which is why I wanted to make this video to talk about Mesar and just dive into everything that happened with him this most recent season. Mesar is 5'10", 185, a right-handed right-wing guy, and he's a player who was drafted out of the Slovak League in 2022. He was at just over half a point a game for HK Poprad, which is actually pretty good when you think about it. I mean, the guy was 17, turning 18, in his draft-eligible season playing in the top pro men's league in Slovakia. Filip Mesar had some pretty good production and good projection in his draft-eligible campaign that, unfortunately, did not really transfer to his development the next 2 years. The reason I say that is because he did have a cup of coffee in the AHL with the Laval Rocket, but he ended up going back over to the OHL and not really progressing all too much. We already said this back in 2023, but Filip Mesar as a draft +1 getting under a point per game for the Kitchener Rangers, that was a pretty big red flag. If your guy was getting under a point per game as a draft eligible, he might not even be a first-round talent, but Mesar was a draft +1. This was made even worse when in 23-24, Mesar just barely got over a point per game. Now sure, he was way over a point per game in the playoffs, but still, he's a draft +2 in this year. You would expect him to dominate in the same way that he did for Team Slovakia at the World Juniors. He had 9 points in 5 games over there, very good optimism. But then this most recent season, Mesar only had 18 points in 42 games with the Laval Rocket. And this is really not a good set of numbers for a first-year AHL guy, especially somebody who is in that early 20s age range. Again, I'm not saying that it's impossible for him to explode offensively and start producing the lights out. But from the way things have gone so far, it's not looking all too great. This is why there was a post made on the Canadiens subreddit by John GameStop Jr. asking the question, can Filip Mesar show progress in 25-26, or is he really just a bust? Pretty terrible year overall in 24-25. I'm wondering what the consensus is on his future. I think the top reply from that Wolverine does provide some reasonable takes here. Mesar feels like a bust until he's proven otherwise. And then you had a reply here. I don't think that a 26-year-old can really be considered a bust. That's not a point where you're expecting to get a difference maker. Sometimes you get lucky, but that's not the norm. We can always discuss the counterfactual of we should have taken X, but so can every other team in every other draft. And every single team can answer that question by saying, we should have taken Hudson. Hey, guess what? The Canadiens had 2 chances to take on Hudson, 3 chances actually, before they actually did. They took 3 guys ahead of Lane Hudson in 2022, which is kind of hilarious in retrospect. But here's another reply from CHBot that I thought was interesting. Late firsts have like a 50% chance of making the NHL in some capacity. I think you can still call a player a bust if they're picked there, and don't even manage a game. Let's dive into yet another comment over here. I think the Habs had a plan for Mesar that he didn't like. I think the Habs wanted Mesar to become a speedy center who minded his defense, and that didn't work out. So now the Habs had to go back to the drawing board and try to find a way to salvage the project by playing Mesar to his strengths. His strengths are speed, agility, and puck distribution from the wing. So he's already redundant to Farrell and Laval, and Farrell showed he was a good complement to better players, but invisible on his own. That's the bar that Mesar has to clear. He showed flashes here and there, but he's basically starting all over from scratch in this new role after spending 2 years in Kitchener trying to be something he's not. He's not a bust, yet. He showed he could drive play from the wing before. He just has to find that game again. And I think that's a very reasonable way to think about Mesar and his future. Take some time to readjust the way that he thinks about the game and the way that the team wants him to think about the game. To expand a little bit more, let's go over to Mark Dumont's write-up on Philip Mesar from a few weeks ago. This was from July 24th, talking about how Mesar is the 20th ranked prospect in the Habs organization in Montreal Hockey Now's opinion. Pretty reasonable, I'd say. It's right in there, towards the end of the important prospects. But if you scroll down here, Dumont has a really interesting few paragraphs in this piece. It's fair to suggest Mesar is yet to live up to his draft position, which hangs over his head like hockey's version of the Sword of Damocles. If he was not a first-round pick, you could argue that his rookie season in the AHL was somewhat encouraging, but as it stands, most would describe his campaign as underwhelming. A lot like his time in the CHL, Mesar offered varying levels of intensity on any given night in the AHL, which inevitably led to a lack of consistency and a lower degree of trust from the coaching staff. That's not to say he didn't show flashes of brilliance, but the step up in competition meant that he could no longer exploit the open ice that was offered so freely in junior hockey. He also hesitated to head to the dirty areas of the ice, a cardinal sin for any prospect hoping to one day ascend to the NHL. By the time the playoffs rolled around, Mesar was relegated to the press box, spending all but the final game of the postseason as a healthy scratch. What went wrong for Mesar is written out over here too. He started his rookie season on the right foot, earning 3 points in the opening game of the season against Providence. He followed it up with an assist versus Springfield and Syracuse, pushing his early season totals to 5 points in 4 games. That's when the injury bug reared its ugly head, keeping Mesar out of action until mid-December, forcing him to miss roughly 2 months of the schedule. Once he returned, the play was moving very fast, and Mesar was having a hard time keeping up. To close out the season, he scored just 3 goals and 9 assists in 37 games. That's really bad, man. 5 points in 4 games to open the year, 12 points in 37 games to end off the year. The write-up here goes out there and says that the ask for Mesar is to ideally forget that he was drafted in the first round. It has no real bearing when it comes to his on-ice play, and it puts too much pressure on the player who is already having a difficult time treading water. If he is to restore his position amongst the top Habs prospects, he'll have to focus on providing value every shift, and that won't be easy, especially since he's had a hard time finding open ice in the AHL. So ultimately, when it comes to Philip Mesar, and by the way, that article will be linked in the description, seems like the verdict here is the guy just needs to shoot more, and he needs to be more confident. If he can do that, not saying he's going to be a first-round caliber-like guy in the NHL anytime soon, but he could provide a lot more value. But for now, let me know in the comment section your opinions. Do you think Mesar is a bust? Would you use that word to describe his prospect career so far? Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.